Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome to another session of your social science children. We've been already seeing about the hydrosphere, right? So we have seen what is hydrosphere, then we have seen how the water is being distributed across the globe, and then we have seen about the water cycle, and then about the ocean circulation and also the waves and its importance. So we have seen all these. So now what we are going to see? We are going to see about tides and the types of tides, which is a high tide and low tide, and then spring tides and neap tides, and finally the importance of tides. So we are going to see all these in this session. So first, what is a tide, right? So tide refers to a periodic rise and fall of the ocean water. So the ocean waters periodically, when it rises up and it falls down, that is what we call it as tides. Okay, so when the ocean water rise, places along the coast experiences the high tide. The same way, when the ocean waters fall back, then it is said to be a low tide. Okay, so what is meant by rising of ocean water? There would be usually a limit for the water in the sea, right? So when the water crosses that particular area and it gets inside the shore, okay, we call it as high tide. And the same way, when the water goes beside or beyond this limit, okay, when it gets back from this limit, we call it as low tide, alright. So here you can see this particular place itself, you can see when it is on high tide and low tide, okay. So this is simply the water is there, it is on high tide, but there is no water, it is said to be low tide, okay. Then, now how are these tides formed, right? So there are two important factors due to which tides are formed. One is the gravitational pull exerted by the moon on the surface of the earth. So moon, as we know, it revolves around the earth, right? So that exerts some gravitational force on the earth's surface, and that is how the tides are formed. And then the rotation of the earth. So as the earth rotates itself, the tides are formed. So we are going to see about that in detail now. So being closer to the earth, the gravitational pull of the moon is more than double that of the sun. So the gravitational pull is not only from the moon but also from the sun, okay. So when the moon exerts its gravitational pull, as it is very much near to the earth, it is the power of this gravitational force is more than double the time of that of the sun, okay. So the sun's gravitational force is lesser when compared to the gravitational pull of the moon, okay. So it plays a greater role than the sun in the formation of tides. So apart from the force of the sun, okay, the moon's gravitational force plays a very important role, very major role in the formation of tides. So the same place you can see when the water is there, and see when people are walking, that is water is not there. That is again an example of high tide and a low tide. Fine. So now we will see how this gravitational force works on the surface of the earth. Okay, so here you can see the surface of the earth, and here moon is there. So it goes around the earth, right? So what will happen now? The moon's gravitational force will just pull the surface of the earth, okay. So when it pulls, what will happen? As we know that globe is almost the majority part of the globe is made up of water, right? So what will happen? The ocean surface will get pulled up. So that is called as high tide, right? So again, if you see the gravitation, so this part is getting pulled up. The other side, what will happen? The earth is also getting pulled up. So as the water is getting pulled up by the moon, the same way the earth is also getting pulled up. So what will happen? This part, this side of the earth's surface, okay, the ocean part of this surface is again facing the distance from the moon, right? Just a minute, sorry. Yeah, so as this part faces the gravitational pull from the moon, the earth will also move, and what will happen to this part? The water in this part also faces the high tide because the earth is moving away, so it pulls that water also. So that is how high tide is formed on these two sides, and then the opposite sides, that is the places towards the poles, faces the low tides. So now we will see about high tide in detail, right? So on the side of the earth facing the moon, excuse me. So see, if this is going to be earth and here comes moon. So the side of the earth which faces the moon, which means this side, okay, this will experience more gravitational pull from the moon. So what will happen? This side water will get pulled towards the surface of the moon, which is the ocean water getting towards that. So it causes the water to bulge. So the water in this part will be bulging up. Okay. So the places which experience the bulge are in high tide. That's all. So this part, as I told you, the part where the moon faces the earth, that part will be experiencing the high tide. So now the ocean waters on the earth which are on the opposite side of the moon. So here, excuse me, this is earth and this is moon. I told you this side is facing a bulge, right? So the ocean waters which are on the opposite side, which means the ocean waters this side, okay, that will also experience a bulge. Why? Because due to that gravitational pull, the water is pulling up towards the moon. The same way the earth's surface is also pulling up. So what will happen? The earth layer is moving from this water layer. So this place will also experience a bulge. So again, it is also facing high tide. Understood? So this part as well as this part will face high tide, right? So when these two parts faces the high tide, okay, when these two directions face the high tide, what will happen to the top and the bottom part? That will be just expanded. So these two parts will experience low tide, right? So this happens because the moon pulls away the earth. So as I told you, this side, why does this high tide happens? Because the gravitational pull of the moon will just pull the earth away from the water, okay, so on the other side. So that is why both the sides are facing the high tide. So that is what I told you, the moon's gravitational force on the part of the earth which faces the moon, right? So what will happen? This bulge will happen due to gravity, right? So the opposite side, what is happening? It is happening, this bulge is happening because of this inertia, right? So the earth is also moving along with this water surface. So because of that, so here this water surface is moving, the same way the earth is also moving. So because of that, this part is also facing a bulge, which is high tide. So now we are going to see about low tide. So the two sides which face high tide, the other two sides will face obviously the low tide, okay. So the parts of the earth where the ocean water recedes will experience lower water level. So as the water level becomes higher on these two sides, the other two sides the water level will go down. So that is why those two zones are facing low tide, okay. So this is nothing but low tide. And then as the earth rotates, it experiences two high tides and two low tides in a day. So in one particular day, due to the rotation of the earth, as we know, one rotation is 24 hours. So within a 24-hour day, the earth will experience 2 high tides as well as 2 low tides. So here you can see again the low tide and high tide difference. So here these two are high tides as we have seen. So the places between the bulges. So the places between these two bulges, these two zones forms a low tide. Alright. So that is what we are seeing here. So in this place you can see. Now we are going to see about the next thing, which is spring tide and neap tide. So here you can see this is the surface of the sun, okay. So when this is sun, right, and moon is there, okay. So what will happen? These two, that is the moon's gravitational pull as well as the sun's gravitational pull, okay. So both acting on the same direction or the opposite direction will cause spring tides, which means the sun will apply its gravitational force on the surface of the earth. So because of that, the water will get pulled towards the surface of the sun. So the water will get pulled in this way. The same way moon is also in the same direction, which is a new moon day, okay. So sun and moon on a straight line will form a new moon day, right. So because of that, again the moon will also exert the same pressure on the earth's surface from the same direction, right. So because of that, what will happen again? The water will bulge on the same direction. So two forces on the same direction will cause the spring tide. The other way, if it is going to be a full moon day, right. So sun is on this direction, the pressure is going to come this way. The moon is in this direction, so the pressure is going to be this way, right. So what will happen again? Water will bulge this direction as well as this direction. So on both the directions, water will bulge. So that is what we call it as spring tide. So here what will happen? The higher tide, the high tide will even more be higher. The same way the low tide will even more be lower, okay, because the two gravitational force the earth faces, the more pressure from the sun as well as the moon. So the high tide will even more higher, and the same way the low tide will be even more lower. Fine. So we will see about what is a spring tide now. So during full moon and new moon, the sun and the moon exert a combined gravitational pull. So this combined gravitational pull will have much impact on the surface of water. So gravitational pull on the earth's surface, this causes the oceans to bulge a bit more than the usual. So than the normal bulge, this will be a bit more. So this causes high tides which are little higher. The same way low tides which are little lower than the normal tides. Fine. So these are called as spring tides, and this will happen twice during each lunar month. Each lunar month is a new moon and a full moon day. On these two dates, the spring tide will occur. Alright. So now we are going to see about neap tide. So how this neap tides occur? So this is completely opposite to the spring tide. So the same surface of the sun, then here is the moon, which is the first quarter, okay, from the, so as we have seen here, it will be a new moon day. So as the moon travels, yes, so this will be the first quarter, then the when it comes to the half, it will be a full moon day, yes, and when it comes there, it will be a third quarter, and finally again it is going to be a new moon day. This is the lunar month, right. So when it comes to the first quarter and third quarter, right, what will happen? The same pressure will act on the surface of the earth. So the moon's gravitational pull towards the surface of the earth and the sun's gravitational pull towards the surface of the earth. So the pressure is from both the directions. So what will happen? The lower tide will be a bit higher, okay, because the pressure is not just on the same direction. So it faces pressure from two different directions. So the higher tides or the high tides will become a bit lower, and the same way the lower tides will become a bit higher. Understood? So this pressure and this pressure on both the sides, what will happen? The bulge will be a bit lesser. The same way the low tides will be a bit higher. Fine, that is all about this NEAP tide. So this first quarter and third quarter, the tides will be called as NEAP tides. So here when the sun and the moon are at right angles to each other, so as we have seen in this picture itself, what will happen? See, the sun's pressure will go this direction, yeah. So the third quarter's pressure will come this direction. So where do these two meet? At a right angle, 90 degrees. The same way when it is going to be the first quarter also, this part will also be a 90-degree right angle. So when these two meets at the right angle, these NEAP tides occur, okay. So each other with respect to the earth, it is said to be a quarter phase, fine. So when this happens, the pull of the moon of the earth is partially cancelled by the pull of the earth. So the moon's full gravitational force gets affected by the gravitational force from the sun. So on both the directions, the gravitational force is getting applied. So this causes the high tides which are little lower and the low tides which are little higher than the usual tides. So these are called as NEAP tides, and again these occur twice in each lunar month. Fine. So here you can see when the moon just moves on the surface of the earth, when it comes on the top, a NEAP tide, and when it is going to come on the other side, that is when on a full moon day it is a spring tide. Again in your third quarter it will be NEAP tide. Again in your new moon day it will be a spring tide. So this is how the tides occur. So finally we are going to see about the importance of tides. So why are these tides important? Tides are used by the sailors to enter and leave the harbor. So when they have to reach the land, right, it would be easy during the time of high tide because the water is on the surface, it is almost close to the surface of the land. The same way when they have to go back to the sea, it is again easy during the time of low tides because the water is receding. Fine. So they enter at the high tide and leave with a retreating sea of low tide. So retreating means the water getting back, okay, receding. And then the tides are used to generate electricity. So these tide waves are very much helpful in generating electricity, and then the tides help fishermen catch more fish. So as the high tides, the water comes near the shore, it would be easy for them to catch more fishes, right? So with that, we are ending up this session, children. See you soon in the next session. Thank you. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.